Go ahead, start, please.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sharon Myers, for those of you that don't know me. And I'm an RN, and I also have my master's in counseling and psychology. And I have, for years, had a special interest in behavior change and how we help ourselves and how we help other people change behaviors and get rid of, behaviors that aren't working very well for us. And the whole field, fortunately, has kind of been evolving. So I think I have some newer information today that I'm going to share with you all. So as I go along talking, just if you have a question, just go ahead and raise your hand. I'm not so good at looking at the chat, but I'm hoping Linda or somebody will come over here and let me know if there's something on the chat. So we're going to get started. So Linda called the title of the talk Successful Changing, and really in relating it to the program here, how to make changes in your lifestyle habits so that you can live a healthier, longer life. And this whole thing got started, why, let me get rid of this thing here. How do I get rid of that okay thing? It's not, oh, there it goes. Dr. Bukkapatnam gave a lecture on nutrition and cardiovascular disease. Did you guys listen to that? Any of you listened to that when she was talking about food and what it does to our body and how it affects our cholesterol and all that? So she gave that talk, and the main points in her talk were that cardiovascular disease is caused by conditions such as high cholesterol, right? We all know that, high blood pressure, obesity, diabetes. And how we eat affects all these conditions. So how much food we eat, right, affects these conditions, and what type of food we eat. So the quality and the quantity. So gaining all that information, you guys are always hearing from Debbie Lucas and different speakers about calories and plant-based diet and all that. And I feel like that's the easy part, isn't it? Just getting the information, right? But what's the hard part? Knowing it and doing it. Doing it is that's the hard part. So actually making the positive changes that we need to make in order to build good habits, and also to get rid of some of our habits that we don't like so much. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So I talked about, the healthy diet is one of the changes that you can make. So being able to stop doing some of the things in our diet that don't make us feel good, that affect our cholesterol levels, that affect our blood pressure, all of that. But there's other things too that affect our cardiovascular risk and that we might want to think about making some changes in. So, exercise is one of those, managing our stress. So sometimes we don't think about stress in terms of it being a habit or a behavior. But for example, but the way that we manage stress is a habit. We immediately go into a habit mode. So, when we get frustrated with a spouse or something because, they're leaving their dishes out on the sink, right? I'm just giving an example. There's different ways that you can handle that, right? And the way that we handle it many times is just a pattern that we've gotten into. So it could be that we first, get agitated and we don't say anything, and we just are marching around the house. And then, we do that for a little while. And then, we have an outburst of anger, about it. Why don't you ever do this, blah, 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 blah. And then that gets a reaction, doesn't it? Usually there's some sort of reaction. And even if we don't get what we want, which is the dishes picked up, we at least get a reaction and we feel like we've been seen and heard, at least for a moment, right? So that reinforces that we did get a response from that behavior. So everything we do in life involves some sort of habit here or there. So managing our stress is included in that. Other things that reduce cardiovascular risk are being smoke-free, limiting or avoiding our alcohol consumption, managing our blood pressure, managing our cholesterol levels, and having healthy social connections, which is what you all do when you come here, which is, you guys, when you come here, you actually stack behaviors, and I'm going to talk about that. So this is the reasons that, that we want to change our behaviors. So what is a habit?
Something you do repeatedly.
Something you do repeatedly. That repeatedly is a big part of it. Any other thoughts about what a habit is? When you think about habits that you do currently,
That you do without really thinking about.
without really thinking about it, right? That's what a habit is. It's on cruise control. It's kind of automatic. Yep. Any other
Default behaviors.
default? You just fall,
That's a good
Like-
standard.
yeah, you just put well, you used to put your key in the ignition, but you don't do that anymore. Now you press the button, right, to start your car. So you guys got it. So something that you do often and regularly, sometimes without knowing that you're doing it. It's a well-learned, so habits are well-learned. They don't just happen. We learn them. We learn them. So a well-learned behavior or automatic sequence of behaviors. Usually there's a sequence to it. This happens and we do this and we do this. So it's relatively situation specific. So what do I mean when I say situation specific?
Certain things for breakfast.
Right, you're in the kitchen, it's a certain time of day. You're in your car. You do certain things in your car that you wouldn't do, other places. You go in your bathroom in the morning. You might use the bathroom, then you might brush your teeth, right? It's all depends on the environment. So the environment is very important. It's situation specific and over time has become reflexive and independent of motivational or cognitive influence. So that's the trouble. That's okay if we have a good habit, but if we have a bad habit or a habit that we don't want, that's the trouble, is that we're not thinking about it cognitively. We don't have any conscious intent about it. We feel like it just happens. Yeah. Or that we have little control over it. Does that all make sense? Yeah, those dang habits. So I just want to, reiterate again, a habit has an automatic sequence of behavior. So it just doesn't happen randomly. We just don't end up at the refrigerator, eating, ice cream out of a pint of, out of a pint container.
Right.
Just don't, there's a sequence that happened before that. It's situation specific. So there's cues in the environment. There's thoughts you have in your head. It involves muscle movement. So you're doing something, and eventually performed independent of thinking about it.
I saw an engineer talking about how he's trying to change his wife's habit about eating ice cream out of a pint.
Yeah.
So he devised a lock put on.
So she has to think about it.
She came out the next day, and her solution was to cut the bottom off the pint. and eat it.
See, but you know what?
I guess I give the points for ingenuity.
You know what, though? She changed her habit. She's doing it a little bit differently, and having to cut, that's a good point, because having to cut the bottom off the quart thing, it causes you to pause. But the problem is she didn't really want to quit eating the ice cream, right? He wanted her to. So we're going to talk about that.
She had to finish the ice cream. You can't give it a shot.
No, you can't. That's the rule. That's the whole sequence. All right, everybody's gonna go home and eat ice cream now after hearing this lecture. We gotta move on from the ice cream. Okay, so where do habits come from? There's so much information out there. There's three major players that contribute to our habits. The basal ganglia, we're gonna talk about that. That's the area of the lower part of your brain. The dopamine reward system, that's the part of your brain that when you do something like I'm going back to the ice cream, eat a pint of ice cream, your dopamine is firing, and the dopamine brings you pleasure. When that fires, it brings you pleasure. So it's firing. And so then when you even think about ice cream, like right now, we're not eating ice cream, but our little dopamine receptors are all firing over, already before we even do it, right? And then the concept called neuroplasticity. We're going to talk about that. So I'm not going to explain that. So, we all think that it's all about willpower, right? Oh, I just don't have the willpower. Something the matter with me. Some people have more willpower than I do. Blah, 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 blah. No, it's not about willpower. It's about these three things. And we're going to talk about those. So we all have habits in daily life. And I just put this slide out just to remind us. We get up in the morning, we brush our teeth, we drive to work or we drive here without really thinking about, how we got the door open to the car, how we pressed the key to start it, how we, backed up. We just don't think about those things. Snacking on chips while watching TV. Sometimes we don't even know the whole bag will be gone. How did that happen? Because we were unconscious. We weren't thinking about it. Some habits keep us healthy, such as walking every day after dinner. You guys coming here, right? This has become a habit for most of you, and those of you that haven't been here in a while, the reason you came back is because once you have a habit established, there's something a little bit uncomfortable about not doing it. You don't feel quite right? You feel like something is not quite right, you're missing it. So those of you that haven't been here in a while, realize that you do have a habit for coming here. It's there. You've got a pathway for it. So drinking water rather than soda is a good habit that we have. And we don't, those of us that are drinking water, that have your water bottles, you're not thinking about it when you're doing the water, you're just doing it. Some habits contribute to being unhealthy, such as overeating in the evening while watching TV, or drinking when we get overwhelmed with our family stress. Or yelling at family members. That's a bad habit because it gets in the way of us having a close relationship with people that we love and that we want to have a close relationship with. Some bad habits can become almost compulsive, such as overeating, smoking, or drinking, and can significantly affect our health and our longevity. So these are the three main areas of the brain that are involved in habit formation. And there's the neocortex, which is the frontal lobe of the brain, and that's the executive area of the brain. That's the part of the brain that makes logical, rational decisions, that when you find yourself, in the middle of eating a bag of chips, for a moment, your rational brain can say to yourself, you don't really need to do this, but you can watch television without eating chips. But then the basal ganglia, which is this reptilian brain, which is that intense voice in your head that tells you to do things automatically, and that it's a little bit of an emergency and you can't help but do this. That's the basal ganglia. And when your basal ganglia thinks that you're doing something that's going to keep you, feed you, allow you not to die from starvation, if some sort of food is in front of you that you haven't had in a while, such as you haven't had sugar. Say you've been doing really well and you're trying to give up sugar and you haven't had sugar in 3 months, and you don't even really think about it that much even. I mean, it's really, you've got a pathway in your brain. And then you go to some party or it's your birthday and somebody brings you a cake and you say, okay, just this once. And so you have this big piece of cake and it's sugary, and your basal ganglia wakes up. It's like, oh my gosh, what is this? And we need this in order to survive. It's kind of food. We haven't had sugar in a long time. We better eat it all now, because we know we haven't gotten this in 3 months. There's some sort of shortage out there. And which is what the caveman did. The reason we had the basal ganglia is back in the caveman and cave women time. It sought out things like that, things that it knew were going to keep us safe, keep us from starving to death. And so if we haven't had sugar in a while and all of a sudden we have sugar, the basal ganglia thinks we're not going to get this in a long time. We better eat it all now. And it sends out these urgent messages, right? Eat it now. Eat 5 pieces. Keep eating, because this is going to go away. We got to store it up. We got to have it, because otherwise you could die. And it feels like you could die sometimes when you're trying to break a habit and you get these strong messages from the basal ganglia. So,
How about if you,
yeah.
how about if you know it's not going to go away, but you still, like I try not to buy bags of candy or a bag of chips because I know I won't stop at just the fear.
Yes.
So, but I know it's not going to go away. I live alone. Don't you like?
Right. So the frontal lobe, the question was, we know that there's going to be sugar on every corner, so we know it's not going to go away. So the frontal lobe, our neocortex, knows that. It knows logically that we can get sugar anytime we want, right? But the basal ganglia, which is the part of the brain that is fight or flight, emergency, the basal ganglia can override other areas of your brain. And it's saying, we haven't had this, it's scarce. We got to get it right now. So your frontal lobe will kind of kick in and try to say, oh yeah, we can get this, but the basal ganglia is like, right? So the basal ganglia is the important part of the brain when it comes to habit formation. It's what its job is to make associative conditioning. So it notices and knows that this is associated with this. If I'm, at 7-Eleven, I know there's Reese's peanut butter cups in there. It associates those kind of things. It associates maybe going on long trips and stopping and getting something to eat. You can't go 2 hours without, right? How could we possibly go 2 hours without stopping to get something to eat? So it's associated with associative conditioning, habits, survival behaviors such as food, water, reducing uncertainty, and safety. Yes.
Maybe it's coming. We have a graduation from college, our granddaughter coming up, and we're having this wonderful caterer, do it all, nice place. And I know she just does the kind of food and how do I stop my eating? Oh, I'm trying to go, I don't have food.
Yeah. Yeah. And your basal ganglia, since you don't have it very often, is probably going to really light up at that. So we're going to talk about that. Yeah. Good question. So she's asking, how do you, when you're in a situation where there's something that you really enjoy having and there's going to be a lot of it, how do you deal with that? So we're going to talk about that. So the brain building habits. So this is I just go kind of quickly through this. There's neural connections. So there's nerve connections between the 3 areas of the brain. Information comes into our brain from our senses. So we get information from what we see, what we feel, what we hear, what we smell, what we touch, all those things. When when the messages come in, your brain's job is to organize these things that come in, make sense of it. And many times what we do is we make patterns and we make associations in those things. So the frontal lobe is originally involved in this kind of stuff because it's evaluating, it's making executive decisions. But all 3 parts of the brain is connected. So the bottom part, that reptilian part of your brain, the basal ganglia, it's also involved, and it's noticing what's scarce, what isn't, what kind of made you feel good, what made you safe, those kinds of things. So when your brain recognizes a pattern, says there's a connection between an action and a satisfaction. So if you make some sort of, say you feel uncomfortable because you're feeling kind of anxious, and then you just happen to have had, some ice cream or something, and you feel a little bit less anxious because you kind of got a little bit numbed out. And you do that a few times, your brain makes that association. It makes that pattern. It files that information away in the area of the brain called the basal ganglia or the reptilian brain. So those patterns that helps you get stored away there. At the same time, the dopamine system gets involved. So pleasure gets involved. And it releases substances to help us feel pleasure in response to our behavior. So when we do something, if we get a cue to do something like anxiety, and then we eat some ice cream and it relieves our anxiety a little bit, that becomes a pattern, and dopamine gets involved and says, oh, that was going to reward you. Oh, you had this bad thing that was really uncomfortable and it's going to get in the way of your life. And then you did this and it worked. The dopamine is going to reward you. So you start getting dopamine release. It's the same thing if you're a smoker and you get an urge to smoke a cigarette, you get anxious and you smoke a cigarette and you feel better, dopamine gets released. And that dopamine really keeps you coming back to it. So, so far we've got the basal ganglia making, storing repetitive patterns and being kind of the emergency part of your brain. Now we've got dopamine's jumped in, it's releasing pleasure for you. So we've already got kind of a double whammy going there. So as habits are practiced and become established, once you've got the patterns established, you're doing them kind of frequently, there's less need for that frontal lobe. The neocortex says, oh, we've got a pattern going here. It's working. I don't need to be involved in this. So that's when it becomes automatic. The basal ganglia is kind of in charge of those habits and those patterns. And the neocortex, the frontal lobe, is no longer really in charge of it. So the driver of it is that reptilian brain, the instinctual part of your brain. So they become automatic, and many of them out of our conscious control. The dopamine reward system helps to solidify our automatic responses. So we've got a lot going on there. So it's not just about willpower. So our brains chase that dopamine high. So when a behavior comes along that results in a reward, such as a relief from a feeling, a relief of hunger, the brain builds a connection between the behavior and pleasure or relief, and that can be hard to get rid of. So there's a link between, the next slide is going to show more a cue, action, and reward. So there's a cue, there's something you get anxious. There's a craving then for food or ice cream. You get a response, which you get a little bit relief. You feel kind of numb, you feel more relaxed. And then the dopamine fires, you get a reward for it. And before you know it, you don't even know that you're having an uncomfortable feeling. You just, walk in the house at night and you've had a rough day, and before you know it, you're standing in front of the refrigerator or the cupboard. It's just automatic. And then you're in the middle of it, and then all of a sudden your frontal lobe kicks in and says, why are you doing this? But by that time, the dopamine's firing and you got the pattern going, and it's a whole mess. So the link of that cue, action, reward is how habit is born. It's also how habit can be broken. If we repeat this behavior in order to get the relief and hit a pleasure, that habit becomes strong, and we create an ingrained pathway in our brain. So this just kind of goes over it. Cue, you experience a stimuli. So tell me with you guys, so give me a cue, something that you think might cue you to do a habit. You may not know because many of our habits are so ingrained, but if you can think about it, think of a habit that you have. What's some sort of cue that you think triggers the habit? Could be a good habit or a bad habit. Yeah, well, chocolate, but there's something that came before the chocolate.
Even when I go to the store, I go, no.
Yeah, okay, so when you go to the store. So shopping, that's a big one. So you're at the store and you're walking down and you're going to get your plant-based diet food, right? And everything's going well, and all of a sudden, you walk by chocolate, right?
And there's a sale on it.
So that makes your dopamine. The sale, you see the sale, the dopamine's firing, the basal ganglia are like, oh. So the basal ganglia are going, we haven't had chocolate in a long time. I didn't even know it was still around. It's scarce. We better just get that chocolate right now. And there it is on sale. And so already the dopamine is firing. So you've got the pathway, you've got that old pathway, you've got the dopamine, you've got the reward system going. Yeah, so exactly. So the response might be that you buy the chocolate, right? And you eat the chocolate and you feel pretty good for a while. So you get the short term. That's the trouble. All these things are kind of the short term reward that you get. Right, the only one piece, the basal ganglia, yeah, you're only going to eat one piece because you're going to save the rest because it's going to be scarce. All right, so dopamine, we've talked about this. This is just kind of a reminder. Dopamine is important in the habit formation. It's wired to avoid pain and bring you pleasure. That's the purpose of it, and to help you survive. And your nervous system is always monitoring for actions that keep us safe and help us avoid pain. We get a release of dopamine, a positive reward, when we make a connection between a cue and an urge, such as perceived danger or uncomfortable feeling. So if we're trying to cross a street and there's a car coming, the reptilian brain says, jump out of the way of the car, move quickly, and we do, and the car doesn't hit us, and we're standing on the side and we're like, woo, we feel like we've just been born again, right? There's some dopamine that gets released from that. So dopamine gives us an intense feeling of reward. Dopamine helps us learn, focus, and can affect our mood too. So this is a great picture. So how we create unwanted habits. So there's a cue, something happens, we're bored, we're doing, we're bored, we're doing, have you ever been working on a project and you're kind of something you have to do and you get kind of bored with it, right? And so we have, that's the cue. We feel bored, or we could be feeling like when I was working on this talk, I'm really interested in this whole field, and I was trying to integrate some new concepts in, and I was reading, you know, neurology and neuroscience articles, and I got a little overwhelmed with it. And my old pattern is, if I get overwhelmed when I'm working on something, is to get up and go in the kitchen and start wandering around, get some nuts, open the cupboard. And so so I got that, my cue was, I got that kind of uncomfortable feeling. So say you get a bored feeling or uncomfortable feeling, you get that cue. And so the craving, which is the urge, what you want to do is you want to get a break from the boredom, or I wanted to get rid of that kind of anxious, uncomfortable feeling, right? That was my craving and my urge at that time. And so then we do a response. So you, in this example, they're showing that this person started, instead of working on their schoolwork or their project, they started scrolling social media. We never do that, do we? Right? So, you know, pick up the phone, start, you know, start looking at stuff. Before you know it, it's been an hour later, right? You haven't like worked on your project. But for me, you know, I got up and this is what actually happened. I got up, I went in the kitchen, I started like moseying around, I got some nuts, and I didn't even notice. And then I got back to my computer and I said, Sharon, you are giving a talk on, on breaking bad habits. And so I thought, great. So I'm going to really observe myself during this whole thing. So then, you know, so I started working on my talk. Well, let me finish with this. So, so the response is, you know, start scrolling social media, or for me, get up and start getting snacks in the cupboard. And then the reward, I felt pleasure when I found something to snack. For a moment, you know, I felt, oh, that was a nice release. And this person in this example, when they were scrolling social media, they weren't anxious about the project they were working on because they were completely distracted and they were kind of in a numb state, right? So there was a reward. And so dopamine was firing both for this person and for me, right? So, I'll talk about, so now, you know, how we create good habits is that there's a cue. So I had the cue of working on this PowerPoint, feeling a little bit anxious, feeling uncomfortable, not understanding some of the, you know, the lingo that was in that talk, in the papers I was reading. And so I wanted to get up and go get the stuff from the cupboard, and I'd already done it once. And I thought, well, I'm just gonna practice not doing it because I'm gonna create a new habit. And doing this talk is gonna give me an opportunity to create a new habit. So I was kind of jazzed about it. I had a little dopamine firing already about, you know, this whole opportunity to practice. And that's what you want to do when you're creating a new habit, is you want to really see the positive outcome. And that dopamine can start firing before you've even done the behavior, right? Because it knows from the past that you felt good when you've done something like that. So I had the cue to go in the kitchen, and I had the urge. And so instead of going in the kitchen, I decided I was just going to get some decaf coffee, and I made a big pot of decaf coffee, and I don't usually put sugar or anything in it. And so I got that, and I just put it in a big cup that said, you know, peace on it. I have a cup that says peace on it. And I just set it down next to me. And every time I had the urge to go in the kitchen, I just took a sip of the coffee, and I said, I'm just going to notice how long this urge lasts. And I'm just going to practice. And I also visualized that I was laying down a new pathway. I was developing neuroplasticity, right? And so it was hard. And so I was working, and I kept getting the urge, you know, like I'd be fine. And then 10 minutes later, the urge would come again. And then 10 minutes later, the urge would come again. And so I thought, I'm just going to keep track of it. So I started doing you know, making a little mark on my piece of paper. And that was really good, because by making that mark, it causes me to pause and really notice what was going on instead of being on cruise control. So I probably had about 10 marks on my paper, but I felt pretty good because I didn't get up and go to the kitchen, you know, because I was really decided I was going to create I was going to do neuroplasticity and create a new habit. So my response was to drink my coffee. And then the reward was that I felt pretty good about myself. I had some dopamine going there. I felt good about that new behavior. And it feels good not to, after you finish, doing a project or something, to not feel, tired and wrung out and numb and bloated and full of food, and when you're not hungry. So when you're doing a new habit loop, it creates a pathway in the brain, which I talked about is called neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity and habits are closely intertwined. They go hand in hand. So when you intentionally, which is what I was doing yesterday, when you intentionally introduce new behaviors or habits, you're forging new neural pathways in your brain. That's the only way to do it. If you keep doing the same old behavior, the habit is not going to go away, because that pathway in your brain is going to get stronger and stronger. So you want that pathway for bad habits, or the habits you're trying to get rid of, you want that pathway to die away and get weaker and weaker. And, they're not sure if that pathway ever completely goes away. Because when we do, if we haven't had sugar in a while and we see it, it's pretty easy to get fired up and go down that pathway. But it does get much weaker, less neuronal connections in that pathway. As you repeat new behaviors or bad behaviors, the corresponding neural connections grow stronger and the habit grows stronger. So if you want to create good habits, you repeat those good habits, because that's how you make that really strong pathway. You can rewire your brain by consciously choosing to perform new or health-oriented habits that are of value to you. So you can see in this picture here, the little person on the bicycle, say that's your new habit that you're doing. You're starting to exercise, and you first start doing it, it carves out a pathway. First, you have to create the pathway. Then as you repeat it, that behavior and that pathway gets stronger and stronger. And then old pathways that you're no longer using weaken, and some of them can go away. They're not, the science on that is not exactly clear, but they definitely weaken. So we can rewire our brains. We can create new habits. And what a relief that would be. The relief that is when we don't do our old habits that are not helping us, that are getting in the way of us enjoying our life and living the best life that we can. What a relief that is to do that. So you got to keep that front and center when you're trying to, create new habits. You just got to picture that pathway getting thicker and that old pathway getting thinner. I mean, it's the truth about it. So just a little bit more about neuroplasticity. It refers to the brain's ability, as you all know now, because you all know about neuroplasticity now. It contributes to the brain's ability to change its structure and function in response to an experience. It's an umbrella term referring to the brain's ability to change, reorganize, and grow new nerve pathways. Neuro refers to the neurons or nerve cells in the brains, and plasticity refers to the brain's ability to change. So our brains can change. Neuroplasticity allows nerve cells to change, relearn, and adjust. We all have the ability. Neuroplasticity is when we're young, when we're like toddlers and in grade school, boy, we've got really quick neuroplasticity. When we get older, when we get to be our age, our neuroplasticity is not as good, but we still have it. We still can change our brain. So that's what enables us to learn, remember new things, and do new behaviors. So core steps, how do we actually do this? So core steps in changing your behavior and rewiring your brain. First step is focus on the why. This is key. The change you want to make must be important and meaningful to you, right? I think lots of times what happens is we go to the doctor or we come here to this program and somebody tells us we should, go on a plant-based diet, right? So we think we should want to do it, but is that what we really want to do right now, right? Or do we just think we should do it? So if you are trying to go, follow a plant-based diet and you keep kind of not being successful with it, I think the first step is asking yourself, why am I not doing that, And maybe it's that you really don't believe that it's going to be that beneficial to you at this point in your life. or, you know, that maybe it's too late, or I don't know what your belief is. You probably don't know what your belief is. So you gotta really sit and figure that out a little bit, because if you don't really, if it's not important and meaningful to you, you're not going to do it, because that basal ganglia is really powerful. So it's got to be important to you, and you have to know why it's important, because you're going to need that information front and center when you're trying to make a behavior change. So think about what it is. If there's something that you're thinking you want to change right now, what is it that you value about creating this new habit or stopping an old habit? Why do you want to stop, you know, eating ice cream at night? You know, why, you know, because it brings you pleasure, but what, you know, so we know that's, it's going to bring you pleasure, but why do you want to stop it?
I have to, have knee surgery,
Uh-huh,
so I gotta lose a certain amount of weight
uh-huh,
in order to have my knee surgery.
yeah,
So I have to change my eating habits and change the way I go about.
yes,
doing
yes. And that's meaningful to you, isn't it? Yeah, so sometimes we do things that we haven't been able to do in the past because some new situation arose that makes it meaningful to us. So I did this study on behavior change in people that had heart failure, and they have to follow low sodium diet and take all these medicines and weigh themselves and all that. And it's hard. And so I talked to the people that weren't doing it, and then all of a sudden they started doing it, like you. All of a sudden they weren't doing it, and all of a sudden, to find out why. And one of the reasons was all of them that made the change over to being what's called non-adherent, or not being able to do it, to adherent, was because they had some event that happened that really scared them and that got them to realize, oh, I could die if I don't do this, right? So sometimes, you know, there's an event or there's something changes, there's some reason, all of a sudden it becomes important and we do value it. So if you really do want to like follow a plant-based diet, but you just feel like you're not really sure if you really want to do it, maybe what you do is just need to gather more information. You know, you need to go online, and or there's a lot of plant-based books out there to read, or talk to people that are following plant-based diet. Maybe talk to your cardiologist who really believes in it, or, you know, maybe you just need more information. I don't know. So, but that's the first step. So do reflection on why the behavior change you're wanting to make is important to you. And visualize you and what your life will look like once the old habit is no longer present. The relief, you know, and if it's something like following a plant-based diet, you know, imagine that your coronary arteries are less blocked, and that you're able to breathe better, and that you're not having chest pain, and, you know, whatever it is, you really got to visualize it. So that's step one, is focus on the why. Step two is getting rid of any bad habits. So here's the thing. We were not born doing our bad habit, right? We were not born, you know, yelling at our spouse when we get anxious. We learned that habit. We practiced it. We created a neurological pathway in our brain. And now our basal ganglia think that that's what we do in order to survive. So every time we get a cue, our spouse does something that triggers us, we yell, and we get a response, and we just keep doing it, you know. So we were not born doing that habit. We weren't born eating ice cream at night. We created those habits. This will be, anybody that has to leave, this isn't going to be on Zoom. So your habit is the result of you reacting in a certain way to trying to cope with your environment and listening to thoughts that you thought were helpful. So it's not because, I think sometimes if we do habits that we're trying to stop, and our basal ganglia is sending out these strong messages, and we keep, you know, doing the old behavior again, we think that, you know, there's something, we have some sort of mental illness or mental problem or something like that. But really, you know, we created these habits that are not helpful to us because we were trying to help ourselves. You know, it's because we are healthy, and we were thinking, I want to take care of myself. So some of these things may have been helpful at one time, or they may feel helpful to relieve the urge and the craving, but there's a big downside to them, right? So something anybody does that's a habit now that seems to help them, but then there's a big downside to it at the same time? Yeah.
not about food, I don't know if it's the same, but I have two steps to go up to the bedrooms in my house. And on the right-hand side, there's a like medicine and stuff like that that you need. The other side, my son-in-law created a beautiful wooden banister.
Uh-huh.
So as as more balance problems, didn't think about it, but well, anyway, day before yesterday, I was leaving, I thought, oh, I'll just run and get a couple of cough drops. So I went up the steps, got the cough drops, turned around in a hurry, didn't use the banister. As a result, I'm happy not to have a broken jaw.
Yeah.
Really hard. And I thought, what can I learn from it? I was laying on the floor, checking out my body to see if anything is broken. And I have to use that every time I go up or down, no matter. what.
Right. So that's true. I mean, she's talking about, is thinking of changing her behavior because she had a bad outcome from not doing a behavior, right? So that's a big cause. So that's why I talked about earlier, people in the heart failure study changed their behavior because they got admitted to the hospital and they almost died, or they had something that caused them to like, oh, this is not working. It's not worth it. I need to do something different. So sometimes, yeah, it is something changes that causes us to change our behavior,
Like that. We have to work.
right? That we're unconscious of. Yeah. Anybody else you don't have to, but anybody else have any behaviors that they do, like eating ice cream at night, right? It feels good in the moment, but it has a big downside. What's the big downside of eating ice cream every night? Hmm? Weight gain,
Weight gain,
Well, that's
No,
actually.
cholesterol.
high cholesterol, because so much saturated fat,
Yeah.
blood sugar,
But
right?
Brain
Brain freeze.
I don't know, I just associate ice cream with good things, so.
Right.
hard for me.
Right, that's what keeps that habit loop going, right? Okay. So, and part of step 2 is getting rid of bad habits. So don't listen like I did when I was working on this talk. Don't listen to that reptilian basal ganglia voice. So, I heard it. Yeah, and I like this quote. This next quote from Amy Johnson. This is a great little book. It's called The Little Book of Big Change. It's such a nice little simple book. You can look at it afterward. And this is a quote from her. The difference between a person for whom a particular thought or behavior becomes a habit and the person for whom it is not is that the person with the habit entertains, takes seriously, and ultimately acts on some thoughts or urges that others do not. That's it. That's it. If you get the urge to eat the ice cream and you don't act on it, then you won't do the behavior. That's it. We think that when we get this strong voice in our head, that it's us, that some wise part of ourself is directing us, and that we need to follow that voice. We don't need to listen to that voice.
Exactly, a reptilian brain.
It's our reptilian brain. It thinks it's helping us. It is pre-programmed. It's on cruise control. It's not even knowing what's going on in our life. It is not us. It is on cruise control. It's pre-programmed. So I like to create a name for that voice in that reptilian brain, and you can create your own. I call it the beast, and I think I think that's what she says in this book. And there's this other book called Brain Over Binge, which is really about how to stop, eating when you're not hungry. And she calls it neurological junk in there. It's just a pathway. It's just a pathway, an old pathway. It's just junk. It's not helpful anymore. So, yeah,
I have a habit
yes.
of eating. I will not leave any food on my plate.
Mm. Right.
No matter what it is that I'm eating.
Right. So your basal ganglia is probably saying, and you without you even realizing it, that a bad thing will happen. You may not have food in the future. We better eat it all now, or there's something bad about not eating. I mean, I don't know what's
I
the
know
reason.
What it is, but
So you have to figure that out.
Never,
Oh.
never.
Yeah, we heard that from our parents growing up.
Me too.
Right.
Every
Don't throw
children in
food away,
China.
you know?
Yeah. So that could just be an old recording, you know, in your brain, and but the basal ganglia, who's the automatic part of your brain, just has that programmed in there, and that's old. That is neurological junk. You know, you either put it in the garbage or you put it in your fat cells, which are the garbage part of your body. You know, which do you want to do? Would you rather have it in the fat cells, collating cholesterol and elevating your blood sugar, or would you rather just put it? It's all garbage. That's our storage. That's our storage for garbage in our body when we have too much. So, you know, which do you want to do? You've got to change, you know, the messages that are being put out there.
And that would help me tremendously.
Yeah. Yeah. So you got to come up with a saying instead of saying, you know, that's the beast or neurological junk. You may want to come up with something more specific for that. You know, do I want to store it in garbage in my fat cells, or do I want to put it in the garbage can? Or whatever works for you. Yeah. Yeah, that's why you have to know the why. That's why it's important to know the why. So calling it the beast or neurological junk or whatever you say, it helps separate the reasoning intelligent part of your brain, which is that prefrontal cortex, from the reactive part of your brain, the basal ganglia, which is the reptilian part of your brain. That reptilian part of your brain is going to send out urgent cues for you to do your habitual behavior. But you have to not see that as important. It's just a pre-programmed thing that's not relevant. It's not relevant. It's not of value. Naming it something allows you to be able to pause and just observe the urges for what they really are, old neurological junk that no longer serve you. We do our behavior to relieve the urge. We want to get rid of that urge. So for me, you know, when I was working on the talk and I had that, my urge was that I got that uncomfortable feeling. I wanted to relieve the urge. The only reason I wanted to go eat and do that behavior was to get rid of the urge. That was it. There was no other reason. So if I don't go and eat to get rid of that urge, that pathway is going to get weaker and weaker. And pretty soon, before you know it, I'm going to be able to work on a PowerPoint talk and not get that urge. So, but if you keep doing the old behavior, you keep getting that urge and then you eat, what do you think is going to happen? Right.
So dopamine is what creates the pathway?
Well, there's two things. No, it's two separate things going on. I thought that too. No, the pathways are just, they can just be created because there's communication between your frontal lobe and the lower part of your brain. And your frontal lobe originally is taking in information and you're doing things, and your basal ganglia is communicating. It's noticing you're doing a repeated pattern. It's working for you. And at the same time, in the middle part of your brain, when the middle part of your brain sees these patterns that are working for you, it starts firing dopamine. So it's kind of two separate things, but they work together.
So what strengthens the pathway?
Repeating it. Good question. She asked what strengthens the pathway. Repeating it.
My husband and I never argued, and his mother had passed away and he was spending every weekend out of town. And his brother was being horrible and just hoarding everything, right? So my husband's mother had promised me a cameo. And so my husband brought it home to me. And then his brother said, no, that's mine. I purchased it such and such a date. So my husband took it back. Oh, I was inflamed. I was so angry and upset.
Yeah.
And he was out of town, right? So it's like, okay, he left town. I can't go back in the house. I'm going shopping. So I've never done this before.
Shopping, we forget. I
So
didn't mention that one.
I went shopping and I had a fabulous time.
Right.
I felt so much better.
Right.
He calls me the next day and we're just chatting and he says, poor Ronnie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Poor Ronnie.
Yeah.
I better go shopping.
Yeah, that's exactly, what a great example, because that's what happens. Originally, our frontal lobe is involved. So originally, you know, we're feeling frustrated and for some reason that we drive by a shopping mall, we say, oh, I'll go shopping, and it works. And so then, you know, maybe 2 days later, something else happens and you do it again. And now you've started a pattern, right? And then pretty soon your frontal lobe is not even involved in it. Your basal ganglia is just sending out these shop if you feel angry. Shop
Yeah.
if you feel angry.
The third day, I was just bored, right? And it's like, what should I felt so good when I had shopped. I bet we need groceries and stuff. Even though we needed it, I still got that.
Yeah.
little-
And at that point, I mean, dopamine is firing
was
too.
Perfectly happy spending money.
Yeah. So you've got, I mean, two things going on. You've got the pathways getting thicker. The neural connections are getting thicker. So it's easier to go down that pathway. The basal ganglia is getting involved. It's almost saying, yeah, we're just going to do this because this is working. It's whatever trouble there was, it's keeping her
That's the
safe.
third day I recognized that this could be a serious problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it hadn't become, you know, entrenched yet, but
It
thanks
was
for,
so amazing
yeah,
how
quick.
quickly It was.
Yeah.
And like my brain went to, you know, there's no solution for this.
Yeah.
to, oh, I guess I better go shopping.
Right.
It was-
Yeah. Yeah. And it feels very, once it gets entrenched, it feels very strong. But the only way that it goes away is if you don't do it.
Right.
And you have to see that those messages is just junk. So, so we do our behavior to relieve that urge, that's it. It's just an old reactive pattern that is not helpful and you don't need to listen or value this urge. We think we get a message from our own brain that it's of value. Do you know how many, think of all the things, the urges that you have throughout the day. You're driving down the freeway and somebody cuts you off. You have the urge to ram them. But do you do that?
No.
No, we have urges like that all day, you know, that come and go. Do you react to every urge you get? You might see some, you know, cute little baby and you miss having a baby in the house and you have an urge to go up and grab the baby. You don't do that. You know, there's all sorts of things. We have urges. Just notice yourself today. Notice kind of, you know, the urges that you have. And do you respond to them? No, because they're not appropriate. And do the same thing with your habits. And this is what I did that really helped. I think to yourself, I get to practice and begin developing a new neural pathway that is helpful to me and extinguish the old pathway that is not helpful. That just, when I think of that, it just gets dopamine firing for me, you know? I love the idea of getting rid of an old habit that in the end makes me feel lousy, you know?
Yeah.
So we already discussed separating yourself from the urges of the reptilian brain. You are not your urges. You don't respond to every urge that you have every day. But there's other things that you can do to support this. So you also want to set up your environment to support your success. I'm sure you've heard of some of these things. So you want to if you're trying to make a change, like follow plant-based diet or exercise, you want to hang out with like-minded people who are doing what you're trying to do. So that's why part of the reason you all come here, right? You listen to Debbie's lecture because a bunch of people that are sitting there, they're also trying to make these changes. Debbie's, you know, really supportive of it. And so that's why you do it. I have an exercise class that I go to at 9 o'clock on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. It's a combination of strength training and strength training and aerobic stuff. And the women there that go to that are all about my age. They all, you know, want to get stronger. They want to, not lose their ability to balance as we get older. We want to be able to lift things. We want to be able to have a good reaction time so we can drive. I mean, we talk about these things when we're there, you know, but we go there and, you know, we talk about other things, but part of the reason that I go there is because I feel like I'm with a group of people that are supportive of what I'm trying to do. You also want to make it easy to do your new behavior. So if your plan is to come here on Monday, Wednesdays, or Tuesday, Thursdays, and Fridays, then you want to, you know, set out your tennis shoes the night before and your clothes that you're going to wear to come here. Make sure there's gas in your car the night before. Put a Post-it note reminder on your mirror when you get up to brush your teeth that said, Sac State Wellness Program today. So you want to, create your environment so that you get up and you get all these, it's almost like a pattern. You see your tennis shoes, you see the reminder, you got gas in your car. It's all just a pathway in your brain. Make it hard to do your old behavior. So if you normally get up in the morning and instead of coming here and getting ready to come here, you go back to bed and you scroll your phone. So you want to make it hard to do that. So as soon as you get up, maybe before you even go to the bathroom, make your bed, put the sheets up, put the pillows on there, have your phone in another part of the room, just set up your environment so it's a lot harder to do that old behavior. You also want to have a substitute for your old behavior. So for me, when I was working on the talk, my substitute for the nuts and the sugar and all that stuff was my decaffeinated coffee. For some reason, just carrying around a hot liquid is very comforting to me. It was not as wonderful as the sugar and the nuts, but it felt pretty good, So you want to have some sort of substitute that you can get to quickly. It has to be something quick. Can't be you have to go search for it or anything like that. Now this other one, this association technique and the stacking technique, I just love. Association technique is where, you associate your behavior that's hard for you to do, that you really are having struggle doing it, with something that is positive. So I don't like to do a stationary bike or the elliptical that much because I prefer to be out in the world. But when I have to do it, well, after I had my surgery, I had to do a stationary bike because that's all I was allowed to do. And so I put on music that I loved, or I listened to a podcast while I was riding the bike. So, because I love to listen to music and I have podcasts that I'm so interested in and love. And so I love those things. And so I just did something that was really easy for me to do. So I did something hard at the same time that I was doing something that I loved and that was easy. And pretty soon those two things kind of become really associated and you develop a pattern. So it's a lot easier to create a hard habit if you associate it with something that you're already doing that's positive. Can you think of anything else that you guys do already that is where you associate two things together?
Stopping at the gas station and getting snacks.
Okay, right. That's a bad habit, right? So we associate stopping at the gas station with snacks, but we could change that, right? To be stopping at the gas station and getting a bottle of water, stopping at the gas station and, I don't know, getting a peppermint lozenge or something, but yes, you're right. You can't just stop at the gas station and expect your behavior is going to change unless you have a plan for what you're going to do instead. It's just not good. You have to have a plan. You have to have it accessible. So that's the association technique. Stacking technique is when you stack things together. So you do a whole series of things. So for example, you get up in the morning and you brush your teeth, and you don't necessarily like to brush your teeth, but it's a habit, and so that you do it every morning. So stack something that you want to do with that. So say, for example, you want to start having gratitude, but you forget to do, think about gratitude and have a gratitude statement. So just decide that every time you brush your teeth, you're going to say something you're grateful for. And pretty soon you don't brush your teeth without saying something you're grateful for. And mindfulness practice, meditation, deep breathing, qigong, all those things really help you to be mindful, and you're less likely to be able to be on cruise control with your old habits if you have a practice where you are seeing what you're doing and you're noticing what you're doing and you're able to take a pause. It's the same idea as when I was getting the urge to go get the nuts when I was working on the talk. I made a little mark on my sheet. I looked at the mark and I focused on that and I was mindful for a moment. So practicing being mindful really allows you to slow down and be aware of your behaviors and what's coming before your behaviors, and allows you to not be so unconscious going throughout your life. It really helps a lot with behavior change.
I heard a good medical piece. The guy was saying that what happens is you develop an itch in your mind for the bad habit. And so you scratch it and then you develop this
Right,
sort of response.
right,
And he said that, you have to break that response, but replace it with something that rewards the itch. So that's how he thinks about it.
mhm,
So even if it's something small, like you say, recognizing it and taking
Yeah.
note of it,
yeah,
you partially scratch that itch.
yeah. Uh-huh, Right.
Versus just trying to ignore it, just trying to making yourself, you use your willpower.
Yeah,
which
right.
always fails.
right,
There's very few people that can just will themselves into. certain
right,
things.
because the basal ganglia thinks that you need to do it to survive, yeah,
Right.
yeah. Good, yeah, thank you.
But by scratching the itch, you mediate that and allow yourself the time to
Yeah,
build another habit.
okay, thank you.
We talked about this in high school, with one of my teachers, where how to build a good habits in terms of study habits.
Uh-huh,
And he was like, people associate doing schoolwork or homework with something negative. So, it's always like a punishment.
yeah,
to-
punishment, right,
So one thing he recommended doing to our class is to reward yourself. And we use this technique that I still use called the Pomodoro timer. Pomodoro from the word tomato. Basically it's those like timers that like an apple or you twist it and it basically the whole point is you set a timer for 20 minutes or
Yeah.
so. You do more homework as much as you can. Then you take a 5-10 minute break. You can watch YouTube, you can go wash the dishes, do something that's rewarding,
Yeah. Mhm.
And then your homework becomes associated with something positive. and-
positive, right. Yeah, so that goes back, I don't know how to get this to go back to the,
Did you have to set
Yeah.
a timer for the break too? or not?
Yeah, because otherwise you do it forever.
so yeah, that has to do with the association technique. So, studying's now associated with having a break. And it's also, that's a little bit of stacking too. That's sometimes association and stacking kind of overlap. And that makes it really strong when you do stacking and you're stacking something and the thing that you're stacking it with is something you really enjoy. That's pretty strong. So the little book of big change that I told you about, I'm just gonna read some of the things that I think are little kind of mantras or just kind of inspiring. Bad habits are not symptoms of having bad mental health. I think sometimes we beat up on ourselves and we continue to do bad behaviors. They are our best attempt to take care of ourselves. It's just a pathway that we created and we can create a new pathway. Think of yourself as a healthy person with a bunch of experiences moving through you. We aren't our brain. Our brain is not the boss of us. That basal ganglia is not the boss of us. It's on cruise control. It's sending out messages that may have worked for something in the past, but they're not what we need now. Our brain can toss out suggestions, but we have veto power. Since we have veto power, we don't need to fear the urges. They're just expect that the urges are just going to come up like they do. Urges just come up all day long. They come and they go, come and they go. Thoughts, feelings, and cravings just move through us. We don't need to latch onto them or act upon them. They're just there. Be happy you are having urges telling you to do your habit because that just gives you an opportunity to practice not acting on them. Notice them. It's an opportunity to build a new pathway for your new, better habit. And these are some books and I have them up here if you want to take a look at them, that I used when I've used them in the past for years and then used them when I was writing this talk. And then also, this is this is a review article. I think it's a 2024 neuroscience of habit formation. So if you want to read something really good, more science oriented, I have the article up here. And you can, if you go to Google Scholar and you just type in the neuroscience of habit formation 2024, this will come up. Okay. All right, any questions? Any comments? Yes.
Any talk similar to this, it's a TED talk.
Yeah, there's TED Talks on dopamine. There's TED Talks on neuroplasticity. Yeah, there's a lot. Habit formation is really,
So good, you're talking.
oh, thank you.
really, really informative about.
They're always looking for TED Talk.
Oh, I'm not doing a TED Talk. I'd really get to practice my new habit if I had to get ready for a TED Talk. Tally, I'd have about 100 tallies.
But you can't answer this, I don't think, but how come so many of our habits, mostly the bad ones, involve eating?
Yeah, because I think because of the dopamine
Very rewarding.
reward system, it's very rewarding.
I also think
Eating
that,
is very rewarding.
Yes,
I also think that when we're young and, you know, we don't have control over a lot of things, sometimes what we can put in our mouth is what we can.
Yeah, I mean,
control.
we-
That's where we choose, where we pick our battles.
you know, we cry when we're young and somebody gives us a bottle, right? I mean, it's,
So we're already, building.
yeah, I think the basal ganglia really has that. And the basal ganglia doesn't know eating from, you know, bad eating from good eating. It just thinks we need eating to survive. And especially if we've been dieting or we've cut back on sugar and then all of a sudden we get it, the basal ganglia thinks, oh, we got to get it all now because we're never getting it again, which is not true because it's right out on every corner. So it's just junk. That's just garbage that it's telling us. Yes.
It's not clear if the bad habit halfway ever goes away.
Yes.
completely, but if you can diminish it.
Yes.
Not by avoiding it. What happens if you don't have ice cream for 3 months and then you do have ice cream? Does it open that pathway back? to the
Yes.
Original volume? Or-
No, it takes a while.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
That's good news.
Yeah, right, yeah. So just know if you do that, which we'll all do that, just notice that you're doing it and get back to the, get back to the idea that pathway and that basal ganglia are not in charge of us. And remember what you're aiming toward. Why did you want to quit that habit and get that front and center, Yeah. And the urges, the thing is, we think those urges are so powerful. They just feel like we're going to die if we don't follow them. But if we don't follow them, if we just did nothing, if we just sat there and put a mark on our paper, the urge, it just goes away. We forget that those urges, they feel so powerful. We think they're not going to go away unless we do something. And they don't, they go away. And when you're first starting to break a habit, they're going to come back more frequently, but eventually they won't even come for that behavior, for that cue. Any other questions? All right, so go forward
Good habits.
and conquer
Basal ganglia.
and ignore that beast and that neurological junk. Except if it's telling you to get out of the way from a car, then you could listen to it.
Stuff around my car yesterday. It's nice to hear it.
Yeah, I know. All right, so if you want to come look at the books or the article, they're up here.
You.
You're welcome.